What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Lassercast. This is the second part of a three-part discussion on Netflix's The Haunting of Bly Manor. I'm here with Danny Torkel, a.k.a. DrZaiusGoD. Pete's not here. We're going to do our best. Our master of ceremonies, our fearless leader, is not here. So together, we will get through this. I'm Chris D'Onofrio, Future Boy Chris, on various platforms. So we are discussing episodes 4 through 6 of The Haunting of Bly Manor today. And how you doing, Danny? You ready to jump into this?
Yeah. Check out our episode 1 through 3 review. It's up on our channel now. We gave an intro to all these characters already. So now we're going to jump right in with episode 4. And we're going to find out who Glowy Eyes is, as I referred to him in my notes for episode 1. First of all, this series, I know you've completed a second rewatch. I'm up. I just rewatched up to episode 7. It is definitely, it gets better the more you rewatch it, as with most Flanagan stuff, just because you start to notice more and more stuff, especially, of course, hidden ghosts and you, all the things that you're trained to look for with Flanagan work. So episode 4, The Way It Came, is written by Laurie Penny and directed by Liam Gavin, who directed A Dark Song. You said you saw that, right? I didn't see it. I have
seen The Dark Song. It's one of those, Liam Gavin's a terrific director. A Dark Song is an excellent film. Depending upon the type of horror fan you are, it's not something that has a lot of rewatchability. It's incredibly dour. You know, it's not like throwing on A Nightmare on Elm Street or, John Carpenter's The Fog, something you could rewatch it over and over again. But he is a talented director, to say the least. And seeing what he's done with episode 4, and you will see in episode 5, you could see why Flanagan got him on board. He saw the talent there.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a horror movie that deals with grief. This episode 4, is literally nothing but grief. It takes place right after Owen's mom passed away at the end of episode 3. So some of the characters are going to the funeral, some of them are staying behind, and then there's this fantastic bonfire scene at the end of this episode with the adults at the manor dealing with Owen specifically dealing with his mother's death, and they're all kind of tributing people in their lives that they've lost. And of course, the other narrative thread of this episode is we get to see the flashback of Danny, and played by Victoria Pedretti, and we get to find out who the ghost that's haunting her is, and it's her ex-fiance Edmund, played by Robbie Attal, I believe his name is. A lot of this was the first episode in Haunting of Bly Manor that made me cry. Haunting of Hill House did it a couple times. This one got me to cry twice. Both times I watched it, same scene both times. This is probably the most grounded episode in terms of the raw emotion that you get from a Mike Flanagan led series.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was the way episode 3 ended. Owen's mother passes, and Jamie and Danny connect, and we find out at that point we know Danny's gay. So episode 4 starts. So now you go into episode 4 knowing that, and you see this relationship and childhood friendship develop, and now you're going knowing all along that Danny's gay. So you pick up little things here and there. You know what it's eventually leading to. You see their happiness growing. Them childhood friends hanging out in the bedroom, and then, going into their engagement party and getting married. And it's just, where they don't, there's not a lot of emphasis on where they grew up, but just the time period, being that it's so fresh in our minds, knowing Danny's preference. The mother, and this jumped out at me the first time, and even more so with the second watch, the mother, Edmund's mother, makes a very subtle gay joke about one of her sons. Like, I can never lie about the wedding dress. I can never give this dress to one of my sons. And she says, maybe Carl or something to that effect.
She said she wanted a daughter, but to give the wedding dress to, maybe I'll give it to my son.
Yeah,
and you brought up the time period. Of course, Bly Manor, the story is taking place in 1987, which means this is happening even earlier in the 80s. And the 80s was obviously the middle of the AIDS epidemic. And, there was a lot of, especially in the United States, a lot of anti-gay feeling. So you could totally understand that when Danny has these feelings, which we start to see for the first time really in the past, not with Jamie, but in the past, where she's getting her wedding dress fitted, and the woman who's fitting her, there's an attraction there. You could tell that there's a fear in Danny about what she's feeling, and that comes out with her relationship with Jamie. And it's so nice, her relationship with Jamie, and how it's just nice that like nobody bats an eye. They didn't feel the need to throw in any kind of like homophobic subplot in anywhere. There's that one reference that you made about the joke. And it's funny because the only other show that I've really paid attention to, I've been on such a movie kick, the only other show I've paid any attention to, my wife and I just finished season 6 of Schitt's Creek on Netflix.
Oh God, what a great show.
Oh,
talk about rewatchability.
Oh my God. But that, and maybe it was literally watching that and Bly Manor back to back, but I was like, wow, we've come a very long way as a society in the way we handle like open gay relationships in popular media, because neither one of these shows has even the slightest hint of homophobia or at all. And it's just like the couples is like Jamie and Danny in this show are, as we will find out, the couple that really lasts in this show.
You made a very good point about there. Like, thank God there wasn't, it was it was a very subtle homophobia, even if you want to call it that. Her making that joke is just letting the audience know that this is why Danny doesn't feel comfortable in her own skin. These little subtle jabs, they just ball up into this thing that is just going to keep holding her back from being herself. And, we move from the flashback into Danny in the house, and she sees, this is another thing I love about Danny's character. She sees Edmund's ghost or Edmund's vision, and then she sees Peter Quint, and man, she darts for the foyer, grabs the poker, opens it up, and almost takes out Owen. And of course, Owen being Owen, he takes it like a champ.
Yeah. And, he has a great line where she goes, "I thought you were Peter Quint," and he goes, "I'm much better looking than that bloke." And
like he's fantastic right off the bat. Yeah. He's like, "Oh, I'm much better looking than that," And and
we also we should mention like the ghost of Edmund keeps popping up every time Danny starts to get closer to Jamie. Like, she makes the first move and Jamie's like, "Are you sure?" And she's like, "Yes, I'm sure." And then almost immediately Edmund's ghost is behind Jamie and she pulls back. And it's like, she's not like allowed to move forward. And we find out in the flashback that she finally breaks up the engagement at the last minute. And this is a guy, by the way, who we're introduced to, that they're best friends as children. And they grew up effectively together as best friends. They were probably each other's first loves. And now, right before the wedding, she tells him, "I can't marry you, I'm gay." And he is so angered by this. Not that she's gay, just angered at, as anybody would be if your significant other was like, "I know we're supposed to get married tomorrow, but I'm not really sure anymore." Yeah. And he gets out of his car and gets plowed by a truck like it's Final Destination.
I'm pretty sure he gets hit by I'm pretty sure it's a bread truck. I don't know why we have to be that specific, but it's worth pointing out. They're also that's a very good point about how this show, especially on rewatches, you will notice things, very subtle, specific things in certain episodes leading up to it. I believe it's the end of episode 3, and I'm not sure we talked about this in the last episode of the Lasser cast, but when Danny and Jamie have the moment, and she turns around, she sees Edmund, and he gets thrown back. Yeah. Now, that has no significance until you find out how Edmund died. You know, it's those little things that they refer to.
Yeah. We were talking about this before, that this show, more than almost any other I could think of, pays off the more you pay attention. Because there are going to be those little things throughout the show, all the way through episode 9, that they'll happen, and you'll be like, oh, they mentioned this very briefly. This happened on the first episode that we did with Pete, where Pete mentioned the thing about the key, where Peter was telling the boy Miles about, everybody has a key, and Miles had mentioned that in episode 2. I didn't even pick up on that until rewatching it after Pete had mentioned that. And there's things like that where, we have no idea why that ghost just flew backwards like that. We find out an episode later, it's because he died getting hit by a bus, and the last thing he saw in his glasses was the lights of this, bread truck coming at him.
Yeah.
So you have those two narrative threads, and then it ends with the bonfire. And this is where I completely lost it. With Jamie tells, the origin of bonfire being the bone fire, and throwing things in to remember the dead. And then we get Rahul Kohli memorializing his mother. And just an epic scene. I wrote down, give the man an Emmy for that scene. Yeah. And I also wrote, I can't imagine if you are somebody who has lived through having a relative have dementia, if you are somebody who has had a parent or any family member die slowly, and I don't know how you watch this episode, in one piece.
Yeah.
Like, I'm very fortunate in my own life that I've not had to go through that, but like my wife has, and I've been there with her. And so this was a really rough episode in parts, but at the same time, the way these characters all love each other, Hannah, Owen, Jamie, and Danny, especially the 4 core adults at the house around that bonfire, you kind of just want to group hug with them at the end of that.
It's a credit to how tight the show is too. I'd imagine watching this on a network show, or maybe something that's more inclined to have 12 or 13 episodes, we probably would have seen Owen's mother, and we probably would have experienced that. But his subtlety in acting and him telling us what's going on outside of Bly Manor, we don't need it, and we still feel all the sympathy in the world. And that speech by the fire, just like you, I said to myself, I'm like, well, this is going to be his Golden Globe clip.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to be this moment when it would be a crime if half of this cast, it would be a crime if they weren't nominated. But very quickly, you mentioned Miles before, and I just want to touch on something. Miles apparently likes to enjoy wine with dinner, because he has an outburst right before they have the campfire, and he wants wine with dinner. Something's definitely up. So Danny sends him to his room, and we get not so much a hidden ghost, but we get a great moment in shots where Danny and him are having a conversation about it. And in one shot on Danny, the door is closed, and then the next shot on Danny, it's slightly open, and then it's open a little more, and they keep cutting back, and the door is in different positions, and I'm like, God damn it, I love this show so much. But again, we go back to the conversation at the fire. They're talking about, Jamie talks about burning old bones, getting rid of shadows. Hannah talks about Rebecca, and makes a very strong statement saying, brilliant young women are always punished, which means so many different things, but it's obviously very specific to what we know here about so far about Miss Jessel and whatnot. And Jamie, we get to Danny. Danny has nothing to say. Danny's not ready to, she puts herself through enough pain regarding Edmund, and she's not really ready to divulge that to anyone just yet.
Yeah. You brought up the door. There's a great hidden ghost in this episode. When Danny runs to the door with the fire poker and is ready to just knock out Peter. And then she opens the door and it's Owen. She's like, oh my God, Owen, I'm so sorry. And in the background, there's a ghost in the far right corner. And then you cut back to Owen and Hannah and the kids come running to the door, and you cut back and the ghost is still there. And they're all now in the room and they're all talking and they're like, oh, you came back? Why'd you come? And the ghost is still there. And you're like, again, it's like, that would be something. And we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, where usually they would show you that ghost and then it would disappear and it just stays there and it lingers. And you're like, and you start to question yourself, like, am I seeing what I'm seeing? Should I be seeing this? Yeah. And it's just, the Flanagan works make you pay attention. And I think that might be why some people criticize and complain about the lack of the scares or the big jump scare moments, because especially, Pete brought it up on our last episode, the whole concept of streaming. Like, I know you and I, we both streamed 3, 4, 5 episodes just this morning before talking. And, when you're sitting on your couch and you have your phone and you have your family and you have everything going on, you might, turn away and miss some stuff. Flanagan's work demands attention. And a lot of people, if you're in the movie theater, you're willing to pay that attention. On your couch, you might not be willing to focus as much. And it's funny because I was watching, my wife was sitting next to me, who Athena was sitting next to me. And I was like, oh my God, do you see that? And she was like, what? I don't. And I pointed out the ghost and she was like, oh, that's a ghost? I'm like, yes. She's not a huge horror fan, so she doesn't know Flanagan's work. She hasn't watched Hill House with me yet.
It's very much the environment you're watching this in, because the funny thing was, watching this today in the morning, I had the windows open, I had the blinds up, and I'm like, oh, was there a hidden ghost in that scene? Like, sometimes you can't make them out during the day, but you brought up a great point when you said lingering ghosts, because during the campfire scene, when everyone's talking about their old bones that they need to burn to get rid of the shadows, Danny is thinking about the funeral, Edmund's funeral. And I will be damned, even it was always creepy. The glasses ghost was always creepy, this idea. But now with the sadness behind it, and she's standing there grieving with Edmund's mother. People are coming by. They're all very sad, obviously giving their condolences. And she has a mirror directly across from her. And Edmund's hand with the reflection of the headlights and just standing there, the hair standing up my arms thinking about it. And they cut to this. And he is there the whole scene with his hand on her shoulder. And she's doing her best. And at one point she has to stop, run over, grab a coat and throw it over the mirror. And then she just starts sobbing into the mirror. It's such a powerful scene. And then we cut to, would you imagine is a few months later, and she's home and she's getting ready to leave to go to England. And Edmund's mother knocks on the door. And you realize at that moment, knowing what you know about Danny's mother, never having ever really been a mother to her, that she really does love Edmund's mother. And it's breaking her heart even more, because Edmund's mother has always been a mother to her. It's breaking her heart even more because Edmund's mother has no idea what caused this. And she know it would absolutely crush her. And it's crushing Danny on the inside.
Yeah. If episode 4 is basically Danny and Owen's episode 5 is 100% Hannah's episode. That is, we get, that was my not so subtle segue into episode 5.
It was a good segue. Listen, before we get there, I just want to say one thing. Flora's dollhouse is a Marauders map, and that's pretty awesome.
That's a great, yeah.
Flora wakes up at one point, looks over, and shit's moved around, and you're like, Flora's dollhouse is a Marauders map. Like that's pretty.
And you have this like little 8-year-old girl who says, "I have a particular system," and you're like,
listen, you mentioned it on episode 1, the first episode we did of this, how I love this girl from the moment she opened her mouth, but I love her even more. I was hanging out with my niece last night, and hanging out with my beautiful, amazing niece, and then to go into 6 hours of Flora this morning. My insides are very gooey right now.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't even talk about, and we'll go to episode 4. Speaking of setting up things that will come, Flora has a hobby of grave rubbing at the manor, and she rubs the grave of Viola Floyd,
Yes. Yep.
who we will not know who that is until much later on in the season, but
yes.
That's just like a subtle hint that is dropped for the viewer who's paying attention. If you're watching this and the next episode comes and you don't hear anything about Viola, you're like, oh, then it must not have made any. But it's a Mike Flanagan, ensemble piece. Everything means something, and everything is going to come back in some way later on. Liam Gavin directs episode 5. It's written by Angela Lamanna, who I don't know her work, but episode 5 was, I think this is the episode that most people that I'm seeing on social media are considering their favorite. I've seen at least 2 or 3 people say episode 5 and really shouting out the work of Tanaya Miller, who is fantastic. Yep. And this is where we start to see a lot of the dream hopping stuff going on. We always kind of thought something was up with Hannah for the first 4 episodes because she's always kind of aloof and never all there, even though she's the queen of the house, really.
Yeah.
And we find out a little bit more. Also, before we get into this episode, we were talking about this before. You have to follow Rahul Kohli on Twitter because he has brought his pun game to Twitter.
Yes.
And
the puns do not end with Owen. They continue on Rahul Kohli's social media. Definitely follow him.
Even though he admits that he is not a big fan of puns and that most of the puns actually came from Mike Flanagan himself. He also said that if he heard the line, "In Paris, I was a sous chef," which means they only let me chop vegetables one more time, that he would kill somebody. And if you see this episode, you will understand why. That line. There's also this he retweeted somebody who had Wendy Torrance looking down at "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy" from The Shining, which of course holds a lot of water to Flanagan fans. And next to it was "In Paris, I was a sous chef," which means they only let me chop vegetables, which shows that that's his that's his line that just keeps repeating. But this episode goes into a lot of Hannah's backstory, and we find out the truth about why Hannah keeps seeing this particular crack wherever she is in the house. What do you think of this episode?
I can definitely see why it's people's favorites. I think it's a terrific episode. Again, like I mentioned before, I think this is a very tight series, 9 being the perfect number. And I do think it's a very good episode. And I was wondering if I was going to enjoy it more or less the second time around. And I feel pretty much the same about it. It's purposely repetitive. Years ago, Danny and I went and saw a film in the theater. It was called Vantage Point. And we saw, and someone yelled out during it, like, "We keep seeing the same thing over and over again. Why are you showing us the same thing from different vantage
points of view?"
They didn't say vantage point, but they were thinking, I'm like, that's what they mean. That's why it's called that. People are exhausting is the point. So, no, it's a very good episode. I could watch Tanaya Miller and Rahul Kohli act the same scenes over and over again forever. They bring something new to it every time. And this is the episode where we also meet the Wingraves for the first time. We meet Charlotte and Dominic Wingrave and younger versions, a couple years younger versions of Miles and Flora. And of course, the wonderful Alex Esso plays Charlotte Wingrave. Alex played Wendy Torrance in Flanagan's Dr. Sleep. She's terrific in both. Another one who nails the British accent. And we get a feel for these people, and it's nice. And Charlotte, right off the bat, is some would consider Hannah a member of the staff, the house staff. And she's very embracing. She's very warm for Charlotte. And how do you feel about this casting, Danny? I'm sure you're not against it.
I love Alex Esso. I've been a fan of her since Starry Eyes, which was a really brutal horror movie that came out a few years ago. The filmmakers who did that, they did Pet Sematary, right? The remake of Pet Sematary.
Yeah, you wouldn't know though.
No, no. But she also was in this movie that I actually reviewed for geeksadoom.com called Homewrecker. That came out. It's on VOD right now, and that is it's a unique little revenge movie. There's some Texas Chainsaw, The Loved One vibes in there. It not at all what it seems, but it's really good, and she's excellent in it. You also get to see in this episode, not only is it Hannah centric with her bouncing around from these like time jumping scenes, but it's also, you also get to see a lot of her talking with Rebecca in the past, a lot of her interactions with Peter, and they are just so natural antagonists of each other. Hannah. So we know that Peter has somehow scammed the Wingraves out of a lot of money. And he's very obviously trying to steal some of Charlotte and Dominic's stuff that they have left behind that is of value. And Hannah being, as we find out, basically Charlotte is so, as you pointed out, she's so open to her. It starts with, why don't you stay the night? Why go home? We find out Hannah was married, but that her husband was obviously cheating on her. And she has this great scene where she breaks down outside and Charlotte is there to comfort her. But then at the end of every one of these scenes, there's this moment where Charlotte's like, well, this has already happened. And then we flash to, she's back in the kitchen with Owen and she's interviewing Owen. And Owen's like, we've done this scene already. Oh, and by the way, you should look out for Miles. And there's a couple scenes where Owen screams right into the camera that go right through you. Yes. And I wanted to just shout out, again, Benjamin Evans Ainsworth as Miles. This kid is like maybe 10 or 11 years old. And he manages at one point to act as if he not only is acting as the character of Miles, he's acting as the character of Miles with the ghost of Peter inside of him. Yeah. And he does it seamlessly. And the moments are so creepy because Peter is a genuinely creepy character. And now you have this like little kid pulling off a creepy man performance. And it's fantastic. Oh man,
and that's really we know that that's absolutely what's going on at this point. In the last episode, the wine pretty much sealed the deal. You know, demanding wine at dinner pretty much sealed the deal. But even before then we knew. But by this point we're like, yes, Peter is definitely somehow inhabiting Miles whenever he wants. And I have to say the Hannah story is really what keeps this episode interesting though. Because the subplot, the background, is essentially is Rebecca and Peter, this good girl falls for the bad boy, classic storyline. That's really what's going on. And
everybody's trying to tell her. There's a great scene in the chapel where Hannah says to her, you can't have it both ways. You can't tell me he's like nobody you've ever dated, but you've dated guys like him before. You can't have it both ways. And like Rebecca is this smart, beautiful woman. I had to look up what a barrister is because in America, I thought she wanted to be a coffee maker at Starbucks. And it turns out that she wants to be a lawyer in England. That's what barrister means in England.
That's not what that is.
Yeah. She doesn't want to be a barista. I had to look that up, but yeah, like so she's everybody's trying to, in the flashback, everybody's trying to warn Rebecca, especially Hannah. It's just, and eventually we find out what does happen to Hannah, which is, I think, again, something we had suspected, but is confirmed for us in episode 5.
So at one point now we're back in the kitchen. Owen, Hannah, Peter is such a hold on, which, by the way, I was telling my girlfriend Denise this before. I keep wanting to call him Peter Quill from Guardians of the Galaxy, but so Peter has such a hold on Hannah that now they're in the kitchen. Owen's making a stew. He wants Rebecca to taste it. Peter has such a hold on Rebecca that they're in the kitchen. Owen's like, "Yeah, taste the stew," and she's like, "No," because she knows what happened last time. As
you said that, that's something that I didn't catch. Even though I just watched it the second time, I didn't catch that little. And again, that's a nod back to the last episode.
2 episodes ago.
Yeah,
she's actually standing there despondent until Peter walks in the room, and then she comes back to life. And what follows that is them in bed. Now, Hannah is inside a memory because Hannah keeps jumping around throughout this episode. And we basically get the old, "I'm going to steal the money and we're going to run away to America." That's what Peter is telling Rebecca. Peter goes to, and Peter leaves the room. He goes back to the wing of the house they're not supposed to be in to steal some of Mrs. Wingrave's old jewelry. And in that moment, Hannah is actually talking to Rebecca, and Rebecca says, "I hate this memory." She's in this memory with Hannah. She's like, "I hate this memory because this is where it all goes wrong." And she looks at Hannah like, "What do you're never usually here during this." So it then moves outside into the hallway, and the kids are outside just looking at what's going on because they're very familiar with this time of night and things that happen in the house at this time of night. And out of nowhere, boom, we get a soaking wet ghost, the Lady of Bly Lake, which is what we know at this point. Choke slams, not doesn't choke slam, but she choke grabs Peter and just starts
drags.
Choke drags Peter down this hallway, and it's quite the sight. So what did you
I mean, that for those people who are craving the jump scare, that's it. That is, you get the end of episode 3 where Glowy Eyes Edmund Ghost flies back. You get a couple moments of Owen screaming at the camera, warning Hannah about Miles, because Miles is, as we find out, going to be effectively possessed in a way by Peter. And then you get this freaking scare. And man, the first time that happens, and again, it's one of those things where you're waiting for it. You've seen every time characters are in a hallway or there's open space, and the cinematographer, the director of photography is Jacob Neist, and he works on almost all Flanagan's work, and it's just, he's so good at doing these tracking shots through these long, I mean, Flanagan loves working in expansive environments. This is a guy who took us to the Overlook in Dr. Sleep. We went to, in Hush, we track all through the house in Hush. Here, we get this just amazing jump scare to end the episode. Oh, actually, the episode ends with, we might have passed over it, but Hannah is led down by Miles with
now we know for sure that it's been shown after Peter's killed by the Lady of the Lake. We know for sure now that he can inhabit Miles' body. So then we cut to Miles. You're saying like, Hannah, I'd like to have a conversation with you. And they go down to the well. Peter essentially commits murder, fulfills the prophecy of him being the true bad guy. Peter is now a villain. He's not just a prick boyfriend. He is the villain. And after that scene, he pushes Hannah into the well. And after that scene, we cut back to the campfire scene again. And Owen says, we can't count on memories. They fade anytime. And this is a slightly different version of it, where Owen asks Hannah to come to Paris with him. And she says yes. And basically realizes in that moment that she's can only interact so much, because that's when Jamie takes alcohol you later, another classic Owen pun. And Owen basically leaves with Jamie, and she's yelling for his name. And in that moment, Hannah is reminding herself the year, the ages of the children to keep her memory going. And as she's saying it to herself, it just starts fading. And she's just saying the children's name. And that's where episode 5 ends. So episode 6, The Jolly Corner. This is directed by Ben Howling and Yolanda Romke, who directed Cargo for Netflix, which is a Martin Freeman, post-epidemic, post-apocalyptic feel, something that neither one of us have the desire to watch right now after 7-8 months of COVID. And this is where we're exposed to the Henry Wingrave office doppelganger. Basically, Henry Thomas just chewing the scenery with a really shitty version of his character. And how do we feel about the angry or snarky Wingrave?
I mean, I loved that I wrote down that his evil grin is tremendous. And then his brother later in the episode says the real you, or the other you, is just an evil bastard, and he calls him the shit grinning fucking monster. And I'm like, oh, I'll write that down too. This is another weird one where Henry has like an evil self that is almost mocking him as he goes along. But this is a character who is going through a very strange situation. We find out that Henry and Charlotte are actually having an affair. Dominic is his brother. Flora and Miles' father is his brother, and he is having an affair with Charlotte. We find this out when Flora has a bit of a jump scare moment. She wakes up, she sees what looks like a little boy in her room, and the little boy has no face. As very similar to the Lady in the Lake ghost, the ghost in the attic who just moans. Yeah. The ghosts of Bly Manor seem to be losing their features as time goes on. And she runs to her mother's room in a flashback, and she's like, Uncle Henry, what are you doing here? And he's putting his shirt on. And they have to kind of concoct the story, which I guess is easy when it's a young kid. But so we then later on find out that because of the timing of Flora's birth, that he is actually the biological father of Flora. And that Dominic, his brother, does not find this out until, I believe it's her like 6th birthday party or 5th birthday party. And he finally does like the math in his head and goes, oh, she was early, but she was too early, and she was too big to really be early. And that leads to a blow up of the Wingrave family. And it's actually, we find out all of this stuff about Henry in this episode. Why does he have this horrible drinking problem? Well, he blames himself for his brother and sister-in-law and his ex-lover's death, because it's after this reveal that they decide to go for basically a second honeymoon. And we never actually find out how they die, but it's on this trip that Dominic and Charlotte pass away. And so he's left a drunken mess. And then we also get the reveal that the person prank calling the house all those times throughout those first 3 episodes was actually Henry calling to hear Flora answer the phone, hoping, because he finds out Flora is his biological daughter. He wants to hear her voice, but he's ashamed to say anything if anybody else answers the phone. So, and at the same time, like, his doppelganger is there making fun of him with this shit-eating grin. And I just thought Henry Thomas did such a good job this episode. And I was really happy that they gave him this episode, because he's kind of a non-character the entire series for 5.5 episodes up until here. We meet him at the very beginning of episode 1, and then he's a non-character until right now. So yeah, I thought this was a good episode. And I'm glad that Henry Thomas got the focus here, because he's been doing so well in the Flanagan resurgence of his career.
Yeah, no, he had some terrific moments this episode. We also get some great moments with Jamie. We get the Moonflower speech, which, like I said about Owen, that's Amelia Eve's Golden Globe clip moment. Right. This fantastic monologue about a moonflower and how it only blooms once when she's sitting in the woods with Victoria Pedretti. And we also we've seen in earlier episodes a different talisman that Flora leaves around. So we get a flashback to, actually, they're not even flashbacks. We should mention that early in the episode when Flora wakes up outside, Jamie and Danny come to her, and all of a sudden one shot, Rebecca Jessel pops up and gives one of these to Flora's head. And all of a sudden she wakes up in her room, and then you find out that she's locked in a memory with Charlotte and Henry Wingrave, who, she discovers the two of them together. And now you realize that not only are Rebecca and Peter inhabiting the bodies of Miles and Flora, but it's not like they're just in this blank space. They're actually getting tucked away into memories that are at the forefront of their minds. So, and there gets the faceless boy ghost gets some screen time in this. By the way, there's a scene where the faceless boy is in front of the dollhouse, and it reminds me so much of the Hereditary poster. That dollhouse with the doors open and those little lights on, very much like Hereditary poster miniature vibes.
Yeah, I brought up the episode of Creep Show in our last Lasercast review of Bly Manor, and Hereditary, really, with the dollhouse, with Toni Collette working on the miniatures, and the way that this show also, it takes you inside the dollhouse. It's not just a toy, it's a character in and of itself. And and how there's a figure for everybody, there's a figure for every ghost. And there's even parts where it's like the camera will linger on the Lady of the Lake clay figure that Flora made, and there's like a musical interlude that goes up. Who is it? The Newton brothers, right? Do all of the music.
Oh yeah, they're Flanagan regulars.
Subtle and brilliant as usual when it comes to Flanagan's work. And there's just they'll hit these notes just looking at a doll in a dollhouse, and you'll just get a shiver up your spine. Like, son of a bitch. There's a lot of great moments in this episode between Henry Thomas, Alex Esso has some great moments when Henry and Charlotte have to say goodbye for the good of hers and Dominic's marriage, which ultimately leads to their death. When they go on a trip somewhere. And then this episode basically ends with the first time Danny actually sees Rebecca Jessel and Peter Quint. And that's, and also the faceless boy
You know, so much less creepy this way. Flora puts a broken, cracked doll mask on his face. You know, that really just, you know, we all felt a lot more comfortable after that.
Yeah, that like taking a bad situation and somehow making it worse. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
What I love so much about this show, and we were talking about this before, is the idea that, again, this is where you start, like that long storytelling again, where, you know, Henry is the one making the calls. These are things that paid off episodes ago. There's so many little examples of that. And as we go on, and we will talk about in our next episode, the last three and the conclusion, so much of this show pays off later on. And the closer you pay attention, the better it gets. And it's actually one of those series that I do think gets better on the rewatch, because you just start to notice so much more, and you start to pick up on things that you might have missed. This is, again, it's 9 episodes. It's almost 9 hours long. You're going to miss stuff no matter how close you pay attention. And especially, you know, with the hidden ghosts and with so many characters, all of which get these amazing stories. You brought up the Moonflower. That story, man, Amelia Eve, holy crap. Like, I love her character in this so much. And that's also really the moment where you really realize that there's something more than just a fling going on between her and Danny, that this is something. Like, her character doesn't feel like somebody who lets people in very often. You know what I mean? Jamie, the character of Jamie, she's very rough around the edges. There's this amazing scene where Miles, who is inhabited by Peter Quint, Jamie's up on a ladder and he messes with the ladder. And she climbs down off that ladder. And Miles is like a 10-year-old kid. And she basically threatens to kill him if he messes with her again.
She says, I will fucking end you.
Yeah. She is so rough around the edges. You could tell. And then the Moonflower story, you know, this is a woman who has had a rough life, has been burned by people. She has a great line where I wrote it down. You don't get to decide who lives and dies. And this is a woman who, she's a gardener by trade because she loves the simplicity of plants, that they live, they thrive, they die. And then from the death of plant life, you get more life. And it's just like, for her, it's this simple, you know, life, you know, goes in continuous waves, and she doesn't ever try to get more out of it from people.
Well, anyway, that wraps things up with episodes 4 through 6 of Bly Manor. Stay tuned to the Lassercast YouTube channel. We will obviously be doing episodes 7, 8, and 9 to wrap up this deep dive discussion. So see you soon.